Welcome back everyone. In today's session we are going to study A Considerable Speck written by Robert Frost. I will be solving the workbook questions very soon. Workbook solutions of A Considerable Speck is going to be a long pending video on request. Please take out page number 46, Treasure Chest, and this section is important. This section will give you the analysis of this poem in brief. Let us read. A Considerable Speck by Robert Frost is a wonderfully graphic description of intelligence in action. Try to learn this expression, and it is a graphic, a vivid description of intelligence in action. Survival instinct. And the survival instinct of the little insect shows or highlights intelligence in action. The subject of the poem is an almost invisible mite, little insect, which the poet narrator discovers on a sheet of paper. Nothing extraordinary. This poem revolves round a little insect's attempts to save itself, to survive. The opening lines of the poem are an account of the mite's panic and its frantic efforts to run across a page of writing in a futile, useless attempt to evade the narrator, in order to escape from the narrator. It is only when the mite moves that the narrator realizes that the speck is a living mite. Not a non-living object, but a living entity. Once he realizes that it is intelligent to survive, the mite displays its intelligence, its wisdom. And once the poet narrator realizes that it is intelligent, he follows its desperate actions with interest. He becomes obsessed and he observes the mite very closely. The poet goes on to explain the reason why the narrator chooses to save the life of the mite. Ultimately, the life of the mite is saved by the narrator. This is what the poem is all about. So learn this section well for all your reference to the context, questions and answers. Dear students, kindly subscribe to our channel, tap the bell icon and also check the pinned comment section for all important video links related to your syllabus. Justification of the title, A Considerable Speck. Now, considerable and speck both are contradictory terms, opposite terms, and these two contradictory terms are placed side by side. Juxtaposition, and this juxtaposition is significant because it immediately sets up a sense of irony and invites the readers to ponder upon the significance of the tiny creature. The juxtaposition intrigues the reader and shows that something seemingly small and unimportant may hold more significance than we initially perceive. Who will notice a tiny little insect? The mite is the protagonist. Surprisingly, the mite is the protagonist of this poem. Who will attach so much importance to the little insect? But here, the poet elevates this poem into the philosophical and meaningful realm through the efforts of the tiny little insect. The term considerable again implies a sense of worthiness, suggesting that the speck in question deserves our attention and thought. The living mite, despite its tiny size, displays behaviors and inclinations that make the poet and the readers consider its existence, intelligence and survival instinct. Dear students, what is the meaning of survival instinct? See, it's there on the screen and try to understand this concept. What is survival instinct? Important. The speck initially seems negligible, but soon triggers deep existential pondering. The figure of speech used here is oxymoron. A considerable speck, oxymoron. A speck that would have been beneath my sight. Here it means something too small or insignificant to be noticed. The speaker introduces the speck, emphasizing its insignificance, indicating that it is so small that it would usually go unnoticed on any but a paper sheet so white. The speck is noticeable only because it is contrasted against the white sheet of paper. The contrast with the lighter background highlights the speck. A paper sheet so white. There is a biblical reference over here. It is mentioned in your Morning Star workbook. Here I am just revising that. The paper was blank with nothing written. This could be a reference to the story of creation according to the book of Genesis, where God created the universe from nothing. The setting of the poem initially is established as a simple personal workspace where the narrator sits at his desk or writing table and he is writing something. This surface, however, is more than just a physical location. It assumes a metaphorical significance. It serves as a metaphorical stage for the drama that unfolds in the poem. And a paper sheet so white, this is also important. This is the primary physical attribute of the setting, the white paper, which presents a stark and empty landscape that creates a high contrast background for the tiny moving speck, the mite. This also suggests a sense of expansiveness, vastness, and also isolation, making the mite's journey across the page seem monumental. This is again important. Beyond the physical environment, we also have an implied emotional and psychological setting. The poem evokes, we will see that the poem gradually evokes an atmosphere of contemplation, deep thinking, empathy, shifting from initial casual observation to deep existential reflection. We get a glimpse into the speaker's internal landscape, that is his mind. He realizes the mite's struggle for survival, and this gives rise to the subsequent philosophical ponderings. We will see everything in detail as we proceed. Set off across what I had written there. Set off, started to move or proceed. The speck moves across the page where the speaker had been writing. And I had idly, without purpose or effect, pointless, poised. What is the meaning of poised? Prepared for action, ready. My pen in air, poised my pen, alliteration. The speaker was about to bring his pen down, presumably to squash the speck, to stop it with a period of ink. Period. Here it refers to the punctuation mark used at the end of a sentence. The speaker thinks of using the tip of his pen dipped in ink to put an end to the speck. Period of ink. Again, there is a biblical reference over here as well. Period of ink refers to the time period of 40 days flood that wiped out everything in Noah's time. You must know these biblical references as well for your reference to the context, questions and answers. To stop it with a period of ink. What is it? It refers to the spot, the speck. When something strange, again alliteration, something strange about it, about the speck, made me think ponder. This was no dust speck. Initially, he thought that the spot was just a dust speck. This was no dust speck. By my breathing blown. Breathing blown, alliteration, another biblical reference. Well, take down the note. This was no dust speck by my breathing blown. According to the book of Genesis, God created man from dust and breathed into man's nostrils the breath of life. The speaker tries to stop it and then he stops when he notices something unusual about the speck. The speck was not an inanimate particle of dust moved by his breath as he initially assumed. He notices that the speck is a living creature, a mite. But unmistakably a living mite, not a non-living object, not an inanimate object, but a living mite with life in it. Mite means a tiny creature, especially a spider-like insect, unmistakably, clearly. With inclinations it could call its own. Inclinations, the mite seems to have its own desires and preferences. It paused as with suspicion of my pen. Here we have a figure of speech personification. The poet attributes human qualities to the mite, such as number 1, intelligence, number 2, decision making, number 3, fear, and here we have suspicion. Number 4, it paused, it stopped, as with suspicion of my pen. The mite seems apprehensive. The mite seems wary of the pen. It stops as though suspicious and then came racing wildly on again. Racing wildly, frantic movements of the mite out of fear and suspicion to where my manuscript was not yet dry. The mite heads towards the wet ink on the page. And what is a manuscript? Manuscript is a text that is written by hand, or a book, document, or piece of music written by hand. So, again, I will mention another important point, imagery. Robert Frost vividly paints a picture of the mite's movements and its surroundings, frantic movements, stopping, pausing. The use of such descriptive language creates a strong visual image in the reader's mind. Personification is also important. Personification allows the reader to connect with the creature on an emotional level and consider its perspective. So this is the significance. Then paused again and either drank or smelt, just like a human being, either drank or smelt. The mite pauses again to possibly drink or smell the ink. The instincts of the tiny insect. With loathing, for again it turned to fly. Loathing, a feeling of intense dislike or disgust, hatred. These are the inclinations of the tiny insect. Loathing, suspicious. With loathing, for again it turned to fly, plainly with an intelligence I dealt. Very important. The mite seems to dislike the ink as it quickly moves away. The speaker observes these activities, these movements of the tiny insect, and he is interested to see more. Plainly, with an intelligence I dealt. It seemed too tiny to have room for feet. The speaker observes that the mite demonstrates intelligence through its actions. So, right at the beginning, we had discussed intelligence in action. Yes, these are the reference points from the poem, the textual references from the poem related to that concept. It seemed too tiny to have room for feet. So the insect is very, very small. Now, plainly with an intelligent side dealt. This also has a biblical reference. This has reference to God's acceptance and appreciation of man's free will and intelligence. Therefore, the biblical references are important. Try to learn them. Despite its small size, despite its microscopic size, the mite must have feet to move, yet must have had a set of them complete. He affirms that the mite must indeed have a full set of feet to express how much it didn't want to die. Very, very important survival instinct. We have, as humans, we have survival instinct, and these tiny insects also have survival instinct. The mite's movement suggests a fear of death, number one, and number two, a desire to survive. And in order to survive, what did it do? It ran with terror, terrified, with cunning crept. Cunning crept, this is alliteration. So, the mite exhibits signs of fear and cunning as it navigates the page, as it moves across the page. It faltered. I could see it hesitate. Keen observation of the speaker. It faltered, started to lose strength or momentum. The mite hesitates, showing a moment of doubt, a moment of uncertainty. I could see it hesitate. Again, a human attribute, hesitating. Then in the middle of the open sheet, all these things are happening on the sheet of paper, on the blank sheet of paper. Cowered down in desperation, alliteration, to accept whatever I accorded it of fate. Cower down, to lower oneself in fear, attempting to become smaller to avoid being noticed. The mite seems to cower in desperation, a state of despair, and this results in rash or extreme behavior, seemingly accepting its fate, that it will not be able to save itself. Whatever I accorded it of fate, I have none of the tenderer than thou, collectivistic regimenting love. What is the meaning of this? But let us first analyze accorded it of fate. It refers to whatever fate the speaker decides to give the speck. Here, according to the speck, the speaker assumes a godlike stature. The speck refers to the tiny insect as well as man being a speck in comparison to God. So to God, people, men are like specks, and to the speck, the poet is like God, a godlike stature. The speaker implies that the mite's fate is in his hands. He will decide the destiny of the mite, and the mite realizes that. The mite hesitates. I have none of the tenderer than thou. The speaker indicates that he does not consider himself excessively tender-hearted, kind-hearted. I have none of the tenderer than thou, a phrase used to denote someone who is excessively gentle, soft or tender. This is the adaptation of the phrase holier than thou, which means behaving as if morally superior to others. And what is collectivistic regimenting love? Collectivistic, relating to the practice or principle of giving a group priority over each individual in it. Giving a group importance over each individual in it, and regimenting, strictly controlling or organizing. So he is not one to regulate his empathy based on what others might think. Again, this refers to an ideology. It's there in your Morning Star workbook. The speaker refrained from killing the mite not because he believed in collectivistic regimenting love, an ideology quite popular in the modern world. Tendering then thou collectivistic regimenting love has reference to the growth of communism during that time. Communism, what is it? Communism is a political system where the state controls everything, advocating the importance of the group over the individual and also rejecting the presence of God. There is no God. Group is important. The poet did not kill the mite because he found that the mite had a mind of its own and therefore the right to live. The speaker is suggesting that a speck with intelligence is superior to a human who is devoid of wit and intelligence. So he did not kill the mite. With which the modern world is being swept, quite popular in the modern world. But this poor microscopic item now, microscopic, very small, almost invisible insect, here it is, obviously the mite. Since it was nothing I knew evil of, I let it lie there, let it lie, alliteration, till I hope it slept. So the poet refers to a trend in the modern world towards collective empathy or group think, which he does not subscribe to. But this poor microscopic item now, despite his previous statement, he empathizes with the tiny creature. Microscopic, as I told you, very small. Since it was nothing I knew evil of, anything harmful or morally wrong associated with it, he has no reason to harm it as it has done no harm. I let it lie there. He decides to let the mite be, hoping that it falls asleep. I have a mind myself. As a human, I have wit, I have intelligence, and recognize mind when I meet with it in any guise, in any form. What is guise? An external form, appearance, or manner of presentation, and typically it conceals the true nature of something. Guise. The speaker acknowledges his own consciousness and the speaker acknowledges the consciousness, the intelligence of the insect as well. He is able to recognize consciousness or intelligence in other beings regardless of their form. Here, Robert Frost elevates the poem. Mind when I meet with it in any guise. He is appreciative of this. He appreciates this. No one can know how glad I am to find. What is the mental state of the poet right now? After seeing the intelligence, the wisdom of the tiny creature, he is filled with happiness. On any sheet, the least display of mind. The speaker expresses joy at his discovery. On any sheet, the least display of mind. He is pleased to find any sign of intelligence, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant. Therefore, we also have a paradox. The poem explores the paradox of a tiny creature possessing a significant impact on the poet's thoughts and actions. The poet is happy, he is filled with pleasure. The paradox highlights the interconnectedness of all living things, no matter how small. Here, the poet himself connects himself with the tiny creature. I have a mind myself, and the tiny creature also has a mind. And we also have symbolism. The mite can be seen as a symbol of the fragility of life and the importance of paying attention to the details. It represents the vastness of the universe and our place within it. Frost, in this way, transforms a seemingly insignificant speck into profound meditation on life, death, and the interconnectedness of all living beings. Very, very important. So you must learn all these critical elements present in the poem. The speaker's focus on the speck highlights the power of perception. The perception of the speaker undergoes a change. He realizes the deeper existential issues. The poem explores how we assign importance to small things. If you are asked to pick out the examples of alliteration in the poem, I am sure you will be able to do so. And if you are asked to give its significance of the alliterative expressions, then note down the important point. The alliteration adds a musical quality to the poem, makes the poem lucid. Musical quality as well as lucidity, and emphasizes certain words and phrases. There is another important figure of speech, enjambment. What is enjambment? The continuation of a sentence across multiple lines without conjunction. Let me see. This is an example. I have a mind myself and recognize no punctuation. Mind when I meet with it in any guise, no punctuation. No one can know how glad I am to find no punctuation on any sheet, the least display of mind. Finally, a full stop. This is also significant. How? Enjambment adds or creates a sense of fluidity and rhythm, drawing the reader deeper into the poem's narrative. Before ending today's session, quickly the themes. Theme number 1, respect for life. The speaker is ready to squash the mite but chooses to let it live, recognizing its struggle for survival. So this shows an inherent respect for all life forms, no matter how small it is. Empathy, another theme. The speaker empathizes with the mite, understanding its fear and desire to live. Observation and reflection is another theme. The poet's close observation of the mite. It triggers his reflective thought process. The observations made by the close observations, the detailed observations made by the poet acts as a catalyst for deeper thought. Intelligence and consciousness, how can you miss that? The poet recognizes and respects the intelligence of the mite, seeing it as a sign of a conscious being. Existentialism. Existential questions are raised, prompted by the mite's behavior. Survival, fate, fear of death. We have all these aspects in the poem, which reveal the universal struggle of all life forms to survive. The significance of the insignificant. We have already discussed this in the justification of the title. Individuality. Frost comments on the modern world's collective collectivistic regimenting love, distancing himself from the trend. He does not want to prioritize group over individual. He wants to give priority to the individual. The importance of personal perspective and understanding. The theme of individual thought. Well, these are the themes, and here I end today's session. I hope you have understood this poem, and soon I will be uploading the workbook solutions. Till then, take care and stay connected.